Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy little human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this craziness today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the Defeo family murders. Not the Amityville horror, but the actual family, the mass murder of almost an entire family that got lost in all of the retellings of this fucking horrible story. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both Bratterstein, but no pressure. Alright, now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can get into this video. Now real quick, I want to preface this with saying, if the audio's a little bit odd, I apologize. I do have the air conditioner on because at the time I'm filming this, we're having a weird heat wave in Los Angeles. It's nonsense because of the time of year it is. And on top of that, I'm 7 months pregnant. I'm 30 and a half weeks today. By the time you're watching this, he may be here because I'm pre-filming, but it's hot. I can't breathe. I gotta have the air conditioner on, so I'm sorry. I'm gonna try to edit it out, but if you hear that, I'm a human. I get hot. I don't want to have pit stains while you guys are all watching me on the internet. I don't know what to tell you. Now, this case. The Defeo case, I feel like, is one of those cases that everyone's heard of. Probably everybody in the world. Anyone who is anyone has heard of the Defeo murders. It's not an unknown case because of the whole Amityville horror thing. However, I feel like whenever you hear about this case, the Defeos are sort of like a footnote to the subsequent Amityville horror haunting. And any video I've ever seen about this particular story, the Defeo murders is like a little bullet point, and then there's like a shit ton of information on the Lutz, his family, and the haunting and all of that. And I was like, I would very much like to know more about the murders that started it all, because that's where more of my interest lies. Not to say I'm not interested in the haunting. If that is your interest, I did already film a video on the haunting portion of this a year or two ago. If you want to search it on my channel, it was on done during Halloween for like a Halloween series, so you can watch that. But today we're going to talk specifically about the murders, what happened that night, the theories involving different things that are not the haunting that caused it, and I don't know, man. I just think the mass murder of an entire family is a little bit more horrifying than the haunting story, but maybe that's just me. With that said, today I'm going to tell you the entire story, and while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup, hence the makeup in Morbid makeup. Now, if that's not really your thing, it's cool. We don't have to see eye to eye to be civil. You are welcome to go find a channel that covers this case in a way you prefer, but if you're on the fence, you're not sure how you feel, maybe stick around. I think you could be surprised by how much you like me. And if you're ever curious as to what I'm using, or you want like links to earrings, nail polish, any of that, it's all listed in the description box for your convenience. And now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the Defeo family mass murders. On November 13th, 1974, in a 3-story home in Amityville, New York, a beautiful, upscale, black and white farm-style-ish house located at 112 Ocean Avenue with a sign out front that said, "High Hopes" hanging above the front door entrance, nearly an entire family was murdered in their beds. Those murdered were 43-year-old Ronald Defeo Sr., his wife, 43-year-old Louise Defeo, and 4 of the couple's 5 children. 18-year-old Dawn, 13-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John. All 6 members of the family were found in their beds, on their bellies, in their pajamas, and all had been killed by gunshot wounds from a .35 caliber rifle, and there were no signs of struggle present in the home. The murders were discovered by the family's only surviving member, and this was the eldest son, Ronald Defeo Jr., who went by the nickname Butch. Now, Butch told police that he had been at work all day, that he got home at about 6 p.m., and that when he got to the home, he wasn't able to get in, so he actually went in through a window in the home, and once he entered the home, he found the just horrifying, bloody scene. Now, you may find that I'm going to switch back and forth between calling Ronald Defeo Jr. Butch, Ronnie, Ronald. Ron Man 5000. I'm not going to call him that. But I just, you know, Butch, Ronnie, Ronald Jr. Those are all the same person. I just know myself, and I know I'm going to go back and forth on that. Now, there wasn't a ton of information out there on the internet about who the Defeos were, which is very frustrating and honestly a little bit surprising because I feel like the name Defeo is just so well known and popular. You would think that so many people would have came out talking about this family and who they were. I wasn't able to find a ton, which you know I like to have that information to tell you, and I just like to know myself. I want to know the people that I'm talking about as well as I can, but anyway, I'm going to now tell you what I was able to deduce and put together about who the Defeo family actually was, who they were as people. Ronald Joseph, quote, Big Ronnie Defeo Sr., was born November 16th, 1930 to parents Rocco and Antoinette Defeo. And Ronald Sr.'s wife Louise Marie Brigante was born on November 3rd, 1931 to Michael and Angela Brigante. So would that make them both Scorpios? Is November 16th still a Scorpio? I think it is. Both Big Ronnie, Ronald Sr., and Louise were considered to be good-looking people. Louise was beautiful enough to be a model in her younger days, and Ronnie, Big Ronnie, was babish enough to actually land her. The two dated for a short while before finally getting married, and Louise's parents were not happy about this. They didn't really like Ronnie, so they actually cut all ties off with the couple once the two had their first baby on September 26, 1951. This was a baby boy who was named after Daddy, Ronald Joseph Defeo Jr. Now, it is said, they say, that as was more common back then, not that it's okay at all, but as was more common back in those days, or at least more widely accepted back in those days, Ronald Sr., Big Ronnie, was a pretty aggressive and abusive man with his family, his wife, his children. And Ronald Jr., Butch, Ronnie, Ron Man 5000, he got the worst of it. He was the eldest son, so the expectations were pretty high on him. And when he didn't live up to those expectations, he was punished. And he was punished in a way that's more severe than would be necessary or be accepted probably by most of us now. And he'd be punished in ways like being physically thrown across the room or slammed into a wall. Moving forward, the family grew, as some families do, and on July 29th, 1956, Louise gave birth to the couple's first daughter, Dawn Teresa Defeo. A few years later, on August 16th, 1961, the couple welcomed their next daughter, Allison Louise Defeo. September 4th, 1962, came Mark Gregory Defeo, and last, on October 24th, 1965, the couple had their last child, a third son named John Matthew Defeo. It was after having, all these kids that it made sense for the family to maybe move into a bigger place. You had a lot of babies and they needed room for this whole family. So this is when they bought the famed Amityville house. It was a beautiful house. It was black and white. It was really large. It had these nice windows in the front. It had an attic and a basement and 2 stories and a boat on the river. Boathouse on the river. It was just a really nice place, perfect size for their large family with room for everyone to grow. Now, let's go back a little bit to Ronald Defeo Jr., Butch, Ronnie, and let's talk a little bit about who he was as a person. As a kid, Butch grew up a bit overweight and dealt with this through most of his adolescence until his teenage years when he began using drugs, which in return made him slim out quite a bit. But prior to the weight loss, Butch was a kid. And as we know, kids can be kind of dicks. So he didn't have a great time in school and definitely suffered from a bit of bullying. So he just had a bit of a rough go and had developed a drug problem. He was particularly into heroin and LSD. Jesus, that is heavy. And that, along with an antisocial personality disorder that he developed in his teen years, made him just a little cocktail of crazy. I don't know what to say, man. He had a lot. He had a lot. Someone's gonna get mad at me for saying cocktail of crazy. And to that person, your feelings are valid. So as Butch got older, he got more and more aggressive, especially in his teenage years. And this is when his parents decided that they might want to intervene. And they put him in touch with a psychiatrist to try to kind of see what was up, what was going on in their little boy's head, since he was not doing so well. But Butch was not open to this. He was not receptive to a psychiatrist. He was not open with this person, and was of the mindset that he did not need help. So it wasn't super successful. You kind of need to be open to get any sort of help. Let me help you. Help me help you. And Ronnie was like, no, because I don't need help, you crazy bitch. So instead of that, they were like, okay, this isn't working. So what we're going to do now is give him everything he wants in hopes that he will be happy, in the high hopes that maybe this will help at all. Maybe a little bit. Please help us. Our son is being a lot. But how did he get that way? I don't know. I don't like to victim blame, you know what I mean? Because I don't think anyone deserves to die. Well, okay, I'm not going to say I don't believe anyone deserves to die for what they do, but, you know, it's a very complicated situation. It's a very complicated situation. Everything is complicated and nothing makes sense. BRATTERSTEIN, 2022. So now, by the age of 18, Butch is given a job at his granddaddy's Buick dealership. And this was a perfect job for him. Butch said this was a gravy job because, I mean, granddaddy owned the Buick dealership. Daddy was his boss, so he didn't really have to do shit. It just wasn't very good for the type of person that Butch was, which was like a bit of an asshole and somebody who just got away with everything. So now he had a job where he could continue getting away with everything. And whether he did a good job, whether he even showed up for work, his dad still gave him a paycheck at the end of the week for an entire week's work. So he was like, cha-ching, things are toit. Now, despite this, despite giving him whatever he wanted, despite, you know, giving him a job where he could do whatever he wanted, Butch and his father, Ronald Sr., never really got their relationship together. They had a bad relationship. They did not get along, and this never went away. Butch hated his father. He hated his father for how he treated him, how he treated his mother, how he treated his siblings, and he wasn't interested in mending that relationship. He wasn't interested in being cool with him because he didn't respect him. So as he got older, things just got worse because now Ronnie, Butch, is getting bigger, and the fight between the two was more equally yoked. So it got to be more and more intense. To give you an example of the intenseness of these two fights, okay, one time, Butch was in, you know, another part of the house when he hears his father, Big Ronnie, and his mother Louise start fighting. And it's an intense fight. And Butch is over it. He's like, you know what? Fuck this. I've had enough. I'm done. And he decides that he's going to go and have a conversation with his father. But before he leaves his room, he decides, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab this loaded 12-gauge shotgun so that this gun could do the talking for me. So Butch walks on down the hall, wherever, you know, I don't know where he was in the house. He walks into the room where his mother and father are, where they're fighting, raises the shotgun, and says to his father, quote, "Leave that woman alone. I'm going to kill you, you fat fuck. This is it." He says this while the barrel of the 12-gauge shotgun is pointed at his father's face, and he pulls the trigger. Now, I have no idea why, because the gun was loaded. It was pointed right at his father's face. There's no real reason why this shouldn't have worked, but the gun did not go off, thankfully, at that point. And in response, Butch simply was like, lowered the gun, walked out of the room, and left a stunned Ronald Sr. and Louise to stand there and soak up what had just happened. He had just almost murdered his father, had zero reaction about it, didn't care at all, just went about his business like nothing had happened. And I just can't even imagine that situation, how horrifying that may be. And maybe that must have been. I wonder if his dad didn't know it was loaded at the time or what, but there's definitely some creepy foreshadowing of what was going to come in the future between him and his whole family, which is just like messed up, you know? But either way, he had got his way. He had set out to do something, and that thing was done. That fight was over. Butch had won that fight, and was seeing that by using a gun against his family, he could get the results that he wanted. So now we head back to November 13th, 1974, when at about 6:30 p.m., a totally frantic Ronald Defeo Jr. ran into this bar Henry's. This was a bar that he was familiar with. He was kind of a regular. He knew all the people there. He had actually been there earlier in the night before going home and stumbling across his family. So he runs in the door screaming, and he says to the patrons of Henry's bar, quote, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot." In response to this, several of the patrons of the bar, who were all people who were friends with the new Butch, because as I said, he was a regular, they all followed him out of the bar. And 6 men then jammed themselves into a vehicle and drove over to the Defeo family home. When they got there, the house was totally dark. There was no movement. It was completely silent except for the sound of the family's sheepdog. It was a dog named Shaggy who was tied up on the property, who was barking like crazy. And as they entered the home, they were smacked in the face with the unmistakable scent of just death in the air. Within moments of arriving at the house, one of the men, I believe this guy's name was Bobby, he had gotten out of the car, had ran into the house, and had ran straight up the stairs to the master bedroom, where he found 2 bodies. He found the body of Ronald Defeo Sr. He was on his stomach. His bare back was exposed, like the blanket was off his back, and there was a bullet wound in the center of his back. And lying next to him was his wife, Louise, and there was just blood everywhere. So in response to this guy was like, "Oh, no, I just gotta go. It's time to go, and it's time to go." So he ran from the house, where he found Butch outside in the yard, just beside himself, like freaking out with grief. And as this happened, another one of his friends, what was this guy's name? I believe this man's name was Joey. He had gone into the house, and he was on the first floor, I believe, and he found the family's home phone, and he called the police, and he reported to the police that an entire family had been murdered in their homes. Both the parents had been shot twice. The first of the 2 bullets that hit Ronald Sr. had shredded his back, tearing through his kidney and exiting through his chest, and the second shot entered the base of Ronald Sr.'s spine and lodged itself into his neck. Louise was also shot twice into her back before she even had a chance to react to her husband being shot, and the bullets shattered her rib cage and collapsed her right lung. John and Mark, the young boys, were shot once each from directly above, and both were pretty messed up, as I'm sure you can imagine, their organs getting a lot of the damage in the process. And last was Dawn and Allison. As the shooter entered the room, young Allison woke up a bit and looked up at her shooter, and as she did, she was shot in the face, dying instantly. The shooter then aimed the gun at Dawn's head, shooting her as well, and pretty much ripped off the left side of her face. It's estimated that the entire ordeal took only 15 minutes. 15 minutes for an entire family to be wiped off the earth. And immediately and in subsequent years, these murders have struck people as odd for a number of reasons. The first one being the positions of the bodies, the fact that they were all laying identically. All of them were in their beds, on their stomachs, backs up. Nobody had tried to get up. Nobody had tried to run. They were just so specific that it looked like somebody had laid them in the same positions intentionally, which is weird. I can see how people would find that to be very strange. Second was kind of goes back to the first, and that's that nobody got up and tried to run. All of them were laying in their beds identically. There was no sign of a struggle, but it was proven that there wasn't a silencer used at the time of the murders. And so people were like, okay, maybe the family was drugged. Maybe they didn't get up because they had been drugged prior to the murders. But when it was tested, when their bodies were tested, it found that there was no sign of sedatives in their bodies either. So this strikes people as very odd. Like, why would nobody hear a gunshot in another area of the house? This is a 35 caliber rifle. This is like a big old hunting gun from what I think a hunting gun is from photos that I've seen. And nobody got up and tried to run. There was zero sign of a struggle. This just strikes people as odd because there were 8 total gunshots fired from 3 different bedrooms on 2 different floors in the house, and nobody heard anything and got up and tried to run. And on top of that, the neighbors didn't report hearing any gunshots that night. All they said they heard was the sound of the dog barking. The medical examiner said after the murders and after they had, inspected the bodies, and I quote, "We did extensive toxicology, not only on the blood and urine, but on all the organs that were removed, and it turned up zero that there was anything in their bodies." And he's referring to drugs like sedatives in that statement. Now, there is a theory that the reason this was able to take place, the reason this happened so quickly, the reason that nobody woke up and ran is because there were actually two shooters, that Ronald Defeo Jr. did not work alone. And apparently, from what I read during the trial, the chief medical examiner who performed the autopsies actually did testify saying that he thought it was like impossible that one person could have committed all the murders at the same time. But one, that seems like a weird thing for a medical examiner to say, because he's just, I don't know their job descriptions. Either way, police don't really think this is the case because they had a lot of evidence that pointed to just one shooter. The main thing is that they did ballistics on the bullets pulled from the bodies, and all of them were proven to be shot with the same gun, which was the .35 caliber rifle, which was proven to be Butch's rifle. And in addition to that, I don't know if I put any weight in this theory specifically because of the person that Butch later comes out to say was his accomplice. But we're going to get into that at the end, the theories and what he has said and things like that. So we'll get there, but I just wanted to give you a little teaser now, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, back to that night. Once the phone call came into police, within 10 minutes there was an officer there, and they were searching the house. And as the officers searched the house and the surrounding, the property, because they had a pretty good sized piece of land, Ronald Defeo stood outside and played the role of a distraught son who had just discovered his entire family murdered. The police searched the outside, even using metal detectors to try to find everything they could. And they also searched inside the home. And this is where they found the box for a .35 caliber rifle that was later proven to be the one used in the murders inside the home. So the murderer did not bring their own weapon if they were from the outside, you know what I mean? Which is already dumb, but Ronald Defeo didn't seem to be that smart to me. I'm sorry, Ronnie, but I calls it how I sees it. When police first talked to Butch, he told them that he believed it was possible that a hitman had murdered his entire family. Not a random hitman, but somebody that he knew, that his family knew, that his father had worked with, done some shady dealings with. And police actually at first thought this was a pretty likely scenario considering the way that the family was killed, how methodical it was, how each of them were just in their beds, and nobody had run. It was just like such a clean, quick murder that they thought that this was likely. So they even ended up taking Butch down to the police department for his own safety and put him not into protective custody, but were protecting him by keeping him at the station. But in looking into the case and looking into the scene and looking at things further, it didn't take long for police to start looking right at Butch Defeo for these murders. The detective working the murders at the time said to Butch, once they were kind of, feeling like it was him, and I quote, "Butch, it's incredible. It's almost unbelievable. Butch, we have a .35 caliber gun box in your room. Every one of the victims has been shot with a .35 caliber. And you've seen the whole thing. There has to be more to it. It's your gun that was used." After the murders on November 18th, nearly 1,000 people gathered to say goodbye to the Defeo family. They had a mass funeral where all of them had their funeral at the same time. And on this same day, Ronald Defeo Jr. was indicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder. The funeral was so full. Initially, they were planning on having a private service, it wasn't going to be open to the public. But the response from the community and from people who were affected and cared about what happened to the family was so much bigger than people expected that they decided to open the funeral up so everyone could come and pay their respects and say goodbye. And there were so many people there that the church was totally full. The outside was totally full. There were people just waiting outside to see if they could get in. And of those people were also the police who were watching to kind of keep things under control because this case was a spectacle. Anyways, initially what Butch told police is that he believed a hitman had killed his family and that it must have happened when he left for work that day. But when police challenged him on this and told him that couldn't be the case because we have determined a time of death and it would have happened in the early morning hours before you ever left for work, and there's not really the chance that you're going to miss seeing this on your way out of the house because you said that you looked in the rooms and you didn't see anything weird. I don't think he said that he looked in the rooms, but he implied that he would... My brain just turned off. Mid-sentence, it's gone. The end. Nice story. Thank you for watching. Police told Butch, like, hey, no, what you're saying is incorrect. These murders happened around 3:30 in the morning, before you would have even left for work, so you would have had a lot of trouble missing this. 1, dead bodies all over the house. 2, rifle shots throughout the house. Somehow they didn't kill you and you didn't hear anything. That doesn't make any sense. So that's when Butch starts to change his story. So what he's now telling police is like, okay, you're right. I was there. That's true. What had actually happened is I was asleep. I woke up and the hitman, pointing a gun at me, wakes me up, holds a gun to my head, walks me through the entire house, and kills my family in front of me. And police were like, Butch, that's dumb. That doesn't make sense. And they push him and they push him, and finally he admits to what he did, saying, and I quote, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." Butch confessed to police that he had murdered his entire family. He said that on November 13th, he woke up at about 3:15 in the morning. He doesn't know why he woke up or what woke him, but that he woke from sleep, that he grabbed the .35 caliber Marlin rifle and entered the room of each of his sleeping family members and murdered them all in their beds. And as he's telling police what he did, he's actually acting out, like pantomiming the whole thing for officers. Which is creepy, 1. And 2, I just realized that I think that was the inspiration for the opening scene in Conjuring 2. Because remember, maybe you don't. Spoiler alert, I guess. It's been years. But Lorraine Warren, in the opening scene of that, is walking around the house kind of as Butch Defeo, as he's possessed. Because, we're not getting into all that, but it's a horror movie. And she's pantomiming shooting all the people, which is what Butch actually did when he did his confession. So there's an Easter egg for a years-old movie for you. You're welcome. After the murders, Butch said that he simply showered, changed his clothes, trimmed his beard, grabbed all the bloodied items, including the rifle, shoved him in a pillowcase, and got in his car before sunrise, driving from his hometown to Brooklyn, where he disposed of all of the evidence in a storm drain. Butch then drove back to Long Island so that he could report for work at the Buick dealership at his normal time, which was 6 a.m. Police went, based on what he said, and searched in the areas where he said he disposed of the items, and they did find the items he had thrown there. They found the clothes and they found a holster for the gun, but they didn't find the gun itself. They later found the gun in a canal. After leaving work that day, which Butch ended up leaving early and kind of going about and doing several things, seeing several people, Butch made a point to set up his alibi. He called his home phone several times from the Buick dealership trying to get a hold of his family, and then every person he saw for the rest of the day, whenever he talked to them, he made sure to mention that he just couldn't get a hold of his family that day, and even tried to call them from various different phones throughout the day, including when he went to the bar that night. So he had gone to Henry's bar and he was there drinking, and he made sure to tell everybody that he couldn't get a hold of his family. And after spending a little time at the bar, he's like, you know what, I'm just going to go home and try to check on them real quick. So he leaves at around 6 p.m. And that's when he stumbles upon the bloody remains of all of his family members. And I actually forgot to mention, it was during this initial telling that what's-his-face, Butch, actually gave police another piece of evidence that showed that he wasn't telling the truth, because he was saying that the murders must have happened later. And one of the reasons he was saying this is that around 4 a.m., he says that he had seen his brother's wheelchair outside the bathroom because his brother had recently had an injury, so he was using a wheelchair, and that he didn't see his brother, but he heard him in there, he heard a flush, and that this was around 4 a.m. The police were like, they were all dead by then, so that can't possibly be true. And I just forgot to mention that earlier, but I thought that it mattered, because I like to know all the things, and I feel like you probably like to know all the things too. Ronald Defeo Jr.'s trial started in October of 1975, and his defense attorney did the best that he could to try to get his client off for the murder charges. He told the court that his client was crazy. That at the time of the murders, he was hearing voices that were telling him to murder his family, and that he wasn't criminally responsible on the basis that he was criminally insane at the time of the murders. He says that that night, Ronald Defeo Jr. had been hanging out watching TV, whacked out of his mind on a bunch of drugs, when a black hooded figure came up to him, handed him the rifle, and urged him to murder his entire family. He says that this is what Ronald Defeo believed because he was, again, criminally insane. Butch ended up saying during his own trial, and I quote, "As far as I'm concerned, if I didn't kill my family, they were gonna kill me. As far as I'm concerned, what I did was self-defense, and there was nothing wrong with it. When I got a gun in my hand, there's no doubt in my mind who I am. I am God." No doubt, no doubt. The prosecution disagreed with the defense's assessment of Ronald Defeo Jr. Obviously. They believed that he was sane at the time of the murders and that he was lying. He was a known liar, troublemaker, and drug addict, preferring LSD and heroin. And even though the case the prosecution had was strong, I mean, he confessed. He led police to the evidence that he tried to hide, and he owned the gun. The gun that he owned, the .35 caliber rifle, was confirmed to be the murder weapon. The lead prosecutor took his job very seriously, and made sure to be very thorough. But the defense also took the case super duper seriously. Everyone really took their job seriously during this murder trial. In case you were wondering, they were all very serious and very professional about what they were doing. The defense actually brought in a man named Dr. Daniel Schwartz to testify for the defense. And this man was very comfortable and fluent in criminal proceedings. Like, he was a good witness. He had testified in hundreds of cases and had interviewed tons of defendants, so he was definitely somebody that was useful for them to have on the stand. And a fun fact for you. Oh, I got a good one. This psychiatrist, Daniel Schwartz, was actually the psychiatrist who interviewed David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, and found him to be criminally insane at the time that he committed his murders. This was the same guy. Full circle moment. I never knew this. There's so many things about this case that Did you hear that? Am I dying? There's so many things about this case that I had never heard of before. And I hope that I'm bringing stuff to you too, because it's very interesting to me. Another interesting thing that happened in this trial, because man, there's just so many things about this trial that's so interesting. Well, apparently, Butch threatened to kill not only his own defense attorney, but the actual judge at his trial. And this is one of those things that, like, I saw reported in a couple of places, but I feel like it's so fantastical. This is one of those cases that, unfortunately, when you look it up, you find a lot of things that I'm like, did that happen? Because that sounds like too much. But on the off chance that this actually did happen, I thought I'd let you know. And if it did, like, what was he thinking? Like, guy, listen. You're on trial for murder. Maybe we don't threaten to kill people while we're on trial for murder. But at the same time, he is trying to get the insanity defense, and that's kind of some crazy shit to be doing that, like, a normal person might not do, so maybe that was strategic. But either way, it's a little dumb. Dumb. Just dumb Ronald Defeo. During his trial, a psychiatrist testified for the defense saying that Butch had a dissociative personality disorder, which essentially would mean that while he was committing the murders, he had been experiencing the murders from the outside of his body, like an out-of-body experience, watching himself do what he was doing, but not actually experiencing himself committing the murders. But a psychiatrist for the prosecution testified that they disagreed, and instead thought that Butch had a antisocial personality disorder, which essentially would mean, like, he knew what he was doing, he knew it was wrong, he just didn't really give a shit. And that's the thing about these trials, is you go out and you search for experts who are going to strengthen your case, and that's why you get, like, some people who say this, some people who say that. It's like you both are the same doctors, not the same doctors, but you both have the same education, and you're coming up with a totally different result, and it's because you're kind of out there buying whoever's going to tell you what you want to hear, you know? So one says he was crazy, one says he was just an asshole. And those are the technical terms that the doctors used at trial. During the trial, it also came out that Butch, prior to the murders, had been kind of spiraling out of control, and as far as, like, trying to keep himself in check. And there was testimony both to his temper and to his growing obsession with guns. And one person even testified that on one occasion, not long before the murders, Butch had been on like a hunting trip with a bunch of friends. And during that trip, he had grabbed a gun and he had held it up to a guy's head who was on the hunting trip with him, and just held it there and stood there and waited until this guy got terrified and just took off running. Butch thought this was very amusing. On November 15th, 1975, so a year and 5 days after the murders, the presiding judge instructed the jury members to go and do their deliberations. The hearing was done, and it was time for them to decide their fate for Butch Ronald Defeo Jr., Ronald Joseph Defeo Jr., aka Butch, aka Ronnie, aka, what did I say, Ronald 5000? Yes. That following Friday, November 21st, 1975, Ronald Defeo Jr. was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. The jury's first vote had come back 10-2, with 2 people holding out, not really sure about how they felt Butch's actual mental state was at the time of the murders, but they ended up re-reviewing the transcripts of Butch's testimony and finally came to a unanimous decision. The vote came back 12-0, and 2 weeks after he was found guilty, he was sentenced to concurrent sentences of 25 years to life in prison for all 6 murders. The judge at Ronnie Defeo Jr.'s trial said of the Amityville murders, he said that they were the most heinous murders that had ever been committed in Suffolk County since its founding. Years later, in 1992, Ronald Defeo Jr. actually did try to get a new trial and get his conviction overturned because he said that he had ineffective counsel. He says that he never wanted to use the insanity defense at his trial, that was all up on the pushing and insistence of his attorneys, that his attorneys told him that this would be the best move, that if he did this there'd be tons of movies and book deals, and that he would just serve a little bit of time, and once he got out he'd be a very rich man, so that they should go ahead and do that. He said that if it was up to him, he would have pled not guilty because he wasn't the one who shot and killed his family members. And the judge said of this motion for a new trial and to overturn his conviction, and I quote, "Defendant's testimony that he did not shoot and kill the members of his family is incredible and not worthy of belief." His original attorney, who he was now saying wasn't an effective attorney, obviously disagreed. He said that he did the best he could. He could assume... What the... He said he did the best he could, considering the client he was dealt. He's like, this man was clearly guilty, a liar, a drug addict, a thief, somebody whose story changed constantly, and this seemed the best route we could go to defend somebody like Defeo. But it is worth noting that I did read that this particular attorney did make some money off the Amityville horror haunting story. I guess he consulted a bit on the book and movie, did something with that, and did receive some money from that, so... I don't know. I don't really think that... I think Butch was down with the sickness of claiming insanity, and I think the attorney was just kind of the kind of guy that's well, I'm going to capitalize on this and make money after the fact. That's kind of where I lean, but let me know how you feel. Now, theories. There are several theories as to what happened in this case. As you know, the big one is that he was possessed when he did it, and the house was haunted, and blah, 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 but we're not going to get into all that, because we've all heard that. Another theory, the biggest one, is that Ronald Defeo Jr. did not act alone when he killed the whole family. He was involved, but he wasn't acting alone. And Ronald Defeo Jr. changed several times who was also involved. He couldn't keep his story straight, probably because it's bullshit. But the most commonly used, the thing he seemed to adopt and use most often and say the most, was that his sister Dawn, one of the 6 that were murdered, was also involved in killing the rest of the family before she herself was also killed. Essentially, what Ronnie says happened here is that when he was 23 years old, he murdered his father, who was abusive. He murdered his mother, who lay in bed next to his father, and he murdered his sister Dawn. But the kids, Allison, Mark, John, they were murdered by Dawn. And once Ronald Defeo Jr. saw what Dawn had done, because it wasn't part of their initial plan, he killed her in response, because he never wanted the kids killed. He just wanted his parents killed. People believe this, I think part of the reason people believe this is because a lot of people don't believe that it's possible that one person committed these murders, because somebody in the house would have heard the shots and woke up and tried to run. So there had to be 2 shooters. The reason people think it's Dawn is because Ronald has said that it's Dawn, and that there's some of the evidence that they say doesn't quite match up with Dawn just being killed in her bed, like the blood spattered doesn't quite match, and that there was unburned gunpowder on Dawn's body, which could prove that she had shot a gun prior to being shot herself. And last, that Dawn had a motive, whereas Ronnie did not, which he definitely did. And that Dawn's motive was that she wanted to move out of the house, that she wanted to leave, she wanted to move in with her boyfriend, and her family wouldn't allow it. But she was also 18 years old, so she could just go if she wanted to, but this is what people think. And when Butch would talk about it, when Butch would talk about the murders, he showed like no emotion for his father and his mother. He didn't seem to care at all. But when he did talk about his brothers and his sisters being murdered, he did seem to show some emotion. So people think that's why too, that he's showing emotion, because he didn't actually kill them. Dawn did. But I don't know, man. This theory, I find it rude and I find it disrespectful, probably just because like Dawn's not here to defend herself. And I do believe that she was just a girl who was murdered in her bed. So to have people then turn it into her being involved in the actual killings when she was a victim herself, I think it's disrespectful and I think it's rude, and it rubs me the wrong way, but it is something that people say, so I wanted to relay it to you, but I don't like it. It makes me feel icky. Ronnie first mentioned this theory, I think he first mentioned it in an interview, and the interviewer who had interviewed Defeo during this, it was like a 4.5-hour interview, and he said, after talking to Ronnie, he said of the Dawn theory, and I quote, "I didn't find anything credible about the Dawn story. In fact, I think the most credible part of the interview was, it was clear to me as a psychiatrist that he was disturbed about the murder of his brothers and his young sister. And I wouldn't be able to say this was absolutely true, but it made me believe that, in fact, he had killed them." As I stated, Ronald Defeo Jr. tried to get a retrial or get his conviction overturned on these grounds because he wasn't the one who killed everybody, but it was unsuccessful. And he did try to go up for parole, and in one of his parole hearings, he said of his family, he said, quote, "I loved my family very much." And now for a little Where Are They Now segment. Ronald Joseph Defeo Jr. is dead. Ronald Defeo Jr. died in prison at 6:35 p.m. on March 12, 2021 at Albany Medical Center at the age of 69. Ooh, 69. So, he's dead. The whole family is dead. And I now just want to kick it to you and I wonder, what do you think? What do you think happened here? To me, it seems like this was a guy who just had a anger problem and a bad drug problem, and that this was either a drug-filled, rage-filled, or money-driven murder spree. Not spree, mass murder. And I think that maybe he thought that this would be a quick and easy way for him to get some money, maybe for more drugs. It's not uncommon for, I'm not saying drug addicts or murderers, but it's definitely not unheard of for somebody to kill somebody for money for drugs, or for somebody to kill somebody while under the influence of drugs when they're already mad because they hate their family, right? And I mean, I feel like this makes sense because just like right before the murders happened, Butch, like, I didn't mention this earlier because it like matters, but it doesn't. It might matter completely, so let's see if it does. Shortly before the murders, Butch staged a robbery. Like, he had $1,900 on him that he was supposed to go deliver somewhere for his job at the Buick dealership, and he like set it up to be robbed by somebody, just so that he could steal that money. So it sounds like maybe he needed some money. And on top of that, he was on probation at the time of the murders for narcotics, which the person who let him out on probation was like, there was no sign of anything, of any violence in him, which is like, okay. But it does make me think that he's out on probation for narcotics. He needs some money. He's trying to get some money. And he would, if his whole family was dead, be the sole beneficiary of his parents' life insurance policies. So these are just the thoughts that I have. Man, life insurance is one of those tricky things. It's like you want it, right? Because you don't want to leave your family fucked to cover like your whole funeral expenses. Because that shit is expensive, but it seems like as soon as you get a life insurance policy, you're basically asking everyone to murder you. But anyways, that's just my thoughts, and I am very curious as to what your thoughts are. So let's call that the question of the day. What do you think happened the night of the Defeo murders? Why do you think it happened? Who do you think did it? All theories, leave them down below. Fuck it, let's even discuss the supernatural one. This is the point where you can let all of your freak flags fly. All theories are open. I would love to know what you actually think happened. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for remembering the Defeo family with me today. I feel like their story is so important to remember because I'm like bummed. In reading about it, I'm bummed because you know, if you've been here before, I like to like really get into the victims when I talk about cases. I like to learn everything I can about them. I like to kind of have an idea of who they are and tell you who they were as people, so they're more than just their story. But in this case, that wasn't an option. It's like this entire family was wiped off the map, gone forever. But their stories were overshadowed by a sensationalized supernatural haunting story. And it's like they just got pushed to the side and everybody talks about this. And I feel like that's so fucked up because these were real people. This was real. These people were really murdered. That's one thing that is true and can be proven. We don't know about supernatural. Nobody knows. That can't be proven. This is proven. These people were murdered all in their homes, in their beds by their son, by their brother. That's fucking sad. An entire family was gone in a matter of minutes. And that should be what people talk about more so than the supernatural aspect. So that's kind of what I wanted to do today. And so I'm glad that you sat here with me and chilled and listened because it matters and it's fucked up. Anyways, guys, please let me know down below of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, but whenever you leave a suggestion, I put your name next to it so that if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. And I love looking into what cases you're into because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. Of course, if you haven't already, don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is linked down below for your convenience. Linked or listed. It's down there for you to find me if you want to hang out. I like talking to you guys over there. And I also list down below all of the makeup I used, the earrings, the nail polish, a link to my merch store where you can get this shirt among other shirts. I don't know how many shirts we're going to have at the time you're watching this video. I know what I have planned. I know when I'm filming this. I don't know when you're watching this, so go ahead and check down there. Yeah, I think that's it. That's pretty much it, yeah. That's all I have to say. So anyways, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.